Hi, Courtney. Thank you so much for coming on Thrival Nutrition Podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here and I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity.
Yes, of course. And I'm very thankful that you're here because I think you're a perfect person to be talking about this topic. I have not been in that stage of life yet as you work with teenagers, and we'll get started on, telling people who you are and what you do. But I know that I'm going to probably learn stuff today and I'm going to take it on to when I get to that stage in life. So go ahead and explain who you are and what you do.
Awesome. Thank you. So I am the founder and owner of Courtney Harris Coaching, and I am a life coach for teens and parents. And it's really just such a joy for me to be in this role because I get to partner with parents and I partner with their teenagers to navigate this time of life, which, as we know, because we've been there as teenagers, is tough, right? There's a lot of influences, a lot to navigate between self images and identity, but then also what's happening in the world. And so there's just a ton to navigate. And I love to work with teenagers and help them find their voice, find their gifts, and really get on the journey to empowerment and from a young age. And so it's really a special role that I get to be in. And I love it so much.
Yes. I definitely think there needs to be more of you
Yes.
because it is that time of life. I mean, we're not that old. So we were not there that long ago
Mm-hmm.
of trying to find who we are separate
Yeah.
from our family, separate from our parents.
Yes.
And then I think the parents go through that transition of you were my baby for the longest time. And now that I kind of have to let you go and, learn on your own and find out who you are, now that I'm a parent, I can see how that will be hard for me in the future.
Yes, so much. And I feel like, for parents, there's a lot of support in the younger years, even if you have the opportunity to take your child to school, like you see the other parents, things like that, there's a lot more connection with other parents. But in the teen years, they're getting on the bus themselves or driving them themselves. You're not facilitating play dates. And so for parents, they feel sometimes very lost and confused on how to support in this role and in this time of life. And so that's why I am also a life coach for parents and supporting them on their journey through this difficult time.
Oh, for sure. Do you feel like, because you're on the younger side, do you feel like the teens are able to open up to you easier? I mean,
Yeah,
definitely more so
yeah.
than their parent, because
I think there's a relatable factor. And, so I've been an educator for the past 10 years and I've spent 6 of those years teaching high school. And so I have a lot of experience. I've worked with over 1,000 teenagers. So I have that sort of buy-in of really being on their team. And that's the stance that I take, that I'm really on team teenager. And that doesn't mean that I'm not on the parents' team, but I really want to build that trust because it's all about the teen becoming empowered in a way that is really healthy and happy and feels good for them and for their family. And so I think that perspective feels very open to teenagers that I work with.
and I think they just feel that through you of you being on their side, because as a
Yeah.
teenager, I think we feel like everyone's against us or
Right.
something.
Right. Yeah. And, you mentioned with parents, it's like with parents, there's emotional history, so much emotional history between them and their child. And so sometimes, especially in the teen years, it's harder to get through with certain messages that as the coach, I might be able to offer a new perspective. And it's really not necessarily something completely different than what the parents are saying or teaching, but it's just, I'm a different person that doesn't have 13 or however many years of emotional history with them.
Right. It's like those things of Isaiah, he doesn't listen to his meat until his friend or someone else tells him. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I've been telling you that forever, but there is
Yeah.
something that comes from other people.
It's true.
And so tell us about the teenage brain. What's going on in their heads?
Yes. So I'm so glad you asked because it's major. I mean, I think a lot of adults, we might think things like, oh gosh, teens are so hormonal and they're going through so many emotions. That's sort of partly true, that it's not really just this hormone spike. It's actually that they're going through a pretty serious, intense brain development phase. And what's happening is that the prefrontal cortex, the part up in the front, which is responsible for our rational thinking, our problem solving, that is not fully developed yet until we're in mid 20s or so. It varies men to women, but So our teenagers, they don't have the full capacity of thinking through, impulse control and the ideas of things like risk taking and looking for new and exciting and shiny things. Like that's what their brain is actually built to do in their stage of development. And so I do teach teenagers about their brain, and I do teach parents about the teenage brain, because it's a way of, first of all, the teen understanding and having self-awareness, and then also the parent having some empathy and understanding and compassion, because sometimes we think like, you're already 15, you should know how to do it for yourself. And they might, but getting through all of the steps to get to that thought is really tricky for them. So those are some of the kind of key points that I really like to teach.
I appreciate that. And that does give me some type of comfort, knowing that like physically, like there is a reason. It's not like, what did I do wrong?
Yes.
What am I doing that I should be doing? So that does give me a little bit of comfort, knowing like, okay, there are things that like we just can't control in this stage of life.
Yes.
And that does give me like that I can see myself giving more empathy because I know that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And it's true that it can also take some of that weight and responsibility off of you, and that it is just a natural part of the development. And yes, the more intense emotions, that is something that comes along with the stage of brain development. And like I mentioned, the potentially risk-taking, and risk-taking could be like, I'm not studying for a test, or it could be, I'm going to try drinking, right? It's a full range of what risk-taking means, but it's the idea that the teenager is really feeling out their boundaries, feeling out where they have power. It's really just a testing and experimental phase. And that, yes, it's not on the parent to control it and box it all. It's more about how can I like support and uplift my teenager through this interesting and challenging time of development, but also give them the space to explore. So,
right. I feel like that would be hard because we're developed. So I think of all the things that can go wrong. And, obviously we have that mama bear protection, want to keep you safe, but I know that can definitely backfire. And that's where kids start, lying and going behind your back. And I never want, I aim to be not that parent. I want my kids to be able to share. And I know my mom always told me that, but it was also the like, I know you and I know you're judging us, you know what I'm saying? So that kept from opening up. And I always have to remind myself, okay, like how do I develop that, to not have that issue in the future.
I think starting there with asking the question, it's a great starting point. Just you asking that and being in tune with that is beautiful. And I think that's even a tool and strategy for everyone listening.
Well, I'm patting myself on the back.
Yes, seriously.
What is the power of the open-ended questions that you can use?
Yeah, so I love actually what you just said really kind of rolls nicely into this, that as parents of teenagers, like parents of teens do need to provide structure and support, but it's also not about just saying, here's exactly how it should be. And like you said, you grew up with, it sounds like your mom was saying, hey, I'd like you to feel open and share. And that is still really hard to get the momentum going. And for the child, the teenager, to feel really safe, or to feel like, how open can I really be? Right. And so I teach open-ended questions as a way to build that pathway. And open-ended questions are just ones that don't have answers like yes and no. And even how is your day can be a closed-ended question, because the answer is like good, bad, shoulder shrug, whatever. And so I teach parents and support parents on building questions that might go a little bit deeper, but also provide the space for their teenager. Well, I'm going to use the word space again, space for their teenager to take up space and actually figure out, how can I think through and actually express myself? And so these are questions like, they can range from talking about emotional intelligence, things like, what would help you feel safe right now? If you notice your teenager feeling like anxious or feeling kind of shut down, or questions like, what are you noticing about yourself and your body? And helping them build emotional intelligence. But this can also be about things like technology. I mean, parents are constantly talking to me about technology usage, and their teens struggles with it. And I advise them on using questions like, how are you creating on your phone? And that's an interesting one, right? Because teenagers are all over Instagram. They're all over like all these apps. And I like to help them rename that as a way of creating. And then the next question could be something like, what kind of interactions online are feeling really good to you or feeling supportive? So I'm sharing these kind of two options, from emotional intelligence to then conversations about technology, but the idea of the open-ended question can be used in any situation at all.
Right. What happens when someone has like a child that's or a teen that is like, how was your day today? Good. And that's like very short and they don't. Is there something that we can facilitate them to open more?
Yeah. So instead of the how's your day, because I do still see that one sort of more closed, is you can say things like, tell me a story about something that happened today, or tell me a detail from your day that seems interesting. So it can also be more of a statement that can be helpful.
More specific.
More specific. And then what I also say to parents is that at the beginning, you probably will keep getting shoulder shrugs or the yes, no, good, bad type answers. And just be persistent in asking and holding space for these questions, because the truth is, and I've been an educator, so I'm not speaking poorly about all of the education system in general, but in schools, it's kind of like, here's how you should be, here's the test question, and here's how to answer it correctly. And then at home, a lot of times things are rushed and parents have to, for the sake of time, help their kids like, okay, you have to do this, then this, then this. So when we actually give our teenagers the space to give any answer and to share any story and any experience, that is actually the opposite of how most of their day runs. So it's a learned skill, and that's where I also facilitate that with the teenagers and help them build up their stamina and also their sense of self-worth to actually step into these questions and think through them, because it is a way for them to have agency and power in their lives. So I guess the advice is stick with it. Right. It can change over time. And that if you are getting those answers, the yes, no, you are not alone, and it is still normal and typical.
Is there something that for our listeners that may not have teens yet, just like me, is there anything that we could be doing to help that process along, or to have that bond and, you know, to encourage our kids not to be closers and keep things to themselves?
Start the questions now, basically. Yeah. I mean, just from any situation of, if you notice any emotion happening with your child, whatever age, you can ask them, oh, where do you feel that in your body? Or what would help you feel comfortable right now? So instead of like, do you need your blanket, or go get a book, or like telling them a specific sort of like picked out idea that we've selected as an adult, we give them more space to think through. And then if there's some wait time, they may not know the answer, and then we can provide some choices, maybe 2 or 3 choices.
Okay. Do you feel like, since you're working with teens, is sex a big issue? I know that as they're exploring and stuff, and this is usually the time they explore the human body.
Right.
I feel like that's definitely a struggle with a lot of parents. Is it kind of the same, I don't know, protocol, I guess, like asking questions? And I mean, you definitely got to give the space and privacy, but then of course there's a line of too much privacy or too much space.
Yeah, I mean, that can even start with like saying, you know, what do you know about sex, or what do you feel concerned about when you hear about sex, or you see it in the movies? And maybe even starting with some sort of context outside of just like the child in their life, but kind of, it's like if you watch a movie or a show together and there was a sex scene, or there was reference to sex, using that and saying, oh, like, what concerns you about that? Or how does that scene make you feel? And so I think, yes, using the open-ended questions, and then of course, supporting this whole process with giving them access to information and letting them know that if they have questions, here's like 3 websites that you've maybe as a parent already looked at and feel comfortable with the way that they present information. So giving them access to resources and the ability to do some research, being open yourself to keep facilitating the space for them to ask questions or share, and then supporting with those open-ended questions. I think that's kind of like a nice three-pronged approach there.
Right. So how do we stay open to the process?
A lot of patience. Yeah, a lot of patience. And you mean as adults, how do we just like keep at this? Because it can get tiring, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's really about patience. And then the other thing that I'm constantly teaching and sharing with parents is self-care, because when you are taking the time and you're reading for 30 minutes each night, or you're ensuring that you're getting the meals that feel nutritious and rejuvenating for you, and maybe you are getting a pedicure or you are getting a massage, but when you're doing self-care, you're coming to these conversations with a little less stress, right? We're not as elevated or maybe as activated, and it helps us stay patient in the process. The other thing, I guess this goes back to not just the teenage brain, but the brain in general. I'm a massive fan of Dan Siegel and his work on the brain. And so he teaches this model of your hand as being the brain, your hand being a model of the brain. So this would be your brain stem. The bottom part is your limbic system. And this is where really your emotions come from. And this is like the fight, flight, or freeze response. And then our prefrontal cortex wraps around it. And this is more where our forehead would be. So this is the side view. And anytime our lid is flipped, okay, so our prefrontal cortex is flipped, it means we're going to be operating from the limbic system or the emotions. And so if we're already there as adults, if our lid is flipped, like we need to take ourselves out of the conversation and take a break. Or if we see that our teenager, our child of any age has a flipped lid, that is the opportunity to take a break and reconvene later, because there's no need to push the conversation if we're already elevated. So actually that model of the brain, for anybody that is watching, not listening to the podcast, but watching, that's something that if you teach your kids and teach your family, everyone can just, if their lid flips, they can actually just give that signal to the family members, and it lets us know like, okay, take a 10-minute breather.
Yeah, and I can see that even now with little kids, especially with discipline, or if something is, going on and you have to discipline as a parent, you always try to not discipline out of emotion. You always kind of want to take that break and breather, just like you said, because you need to come at it, not through being angry or mad, but just calm, collective, and okay, this is how we're proceeding with the discipline. And I think that's always beneficial, more kids and parents both. I mean, no one likes to be disciplined. I know we're not perfect and it will still happen. Yes.
But we always try.
Yes.
And that's the thing, I'm a positive discipline parent educator as well. And we always talk about not striving for perfection, but just growth. And so if you do flip your lid and you do get angry, you're human and it's okay. And we don't expect anybody to be perfect, or any child or teenager to be perfect. And so really just knowing that what we're working towards is growth. And I think also building for parents, another way to be open to this process is continuing to build. I think it's acceptance of the space that your child is going to take up, because it can feel really vulnerable and scary to ask these open-ended questions and feel like, I don't know what answer I could get right now, but just really breathing into that and trying to find some peace and patience with the fact that they are becoming their own human. And that's truly what we want for them, right? As little kids, we're like, you can be anything you want. You can do anything you want. But it's so scary when they actually start to do and become. And so really just acknowledging and remembering those basic goals that we have for our kids, to grow up and be who they want to be.
Yes. So some days I just I can't wait to see you grown up and see you living out your passion and to be able to do adult things with you. And wipe your butt when, after the potty and stuff. But then there are times I was like, oh, I just don't want you to grow up. Like, I want you to stay
right. Oh, I know. So much bittersweet for sure.
Yes.
What
are some resources too?
Yeah. Well, one other thing I was just going to add, I was thinking about one of my yoga teachers always taught that yoga is actually like this practice that is a hard path to the easy life, because yoga is a self-study. It's a way of really looking at yourself authentically and vulnerably and honestly. And that is hard work. But the easy life is being in self-awareness and developing greater peace and ease. And I really think about my work in that way, and using these open-ended questions in that way, that it's going to be hard work at first, but you're really building towards the easier life of deeper connection and deeper trust. And so I also share that gem from one of my first yoga teachers, Christina Sell, because it really resonates with me and the work that I do.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So resources. Yeah. So definitely, if parents are interested in digging in more to these open-ended questions, I have a series on my blog that's called Talking to Teenagers, and I go through different topics from homework and school to substance use to relationships to self-care, and talking to teenagers about all of these topics. And each one of those blogs in the series has a list of open-ended questions to use to support the conversation. So you can find that at courtneyharriscoaching.com, and I would love people to dig more into those questions and let me know how they're going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you see people virtually? I know you're in Austin, just like me, but do you see people everywhere?
I do, yeah. So I work online and in person. So right now I have a client in New York, California, Houston, wherever. And so it's really fun work. And I would love to connect with parents and teens anywhere. And then let's see, other resources I wanted to share are, I mentioned Dan Siegel. I definitely recommend his book, The Whole Brain Child, but then his next book is called Brainstorm, and that's specifically about the teenage years. So if you have younger kids, definitely start on Whole Brain Child. It's like a really user-friendly read that gets into the brain and gives real, usable, doable strategies.
Oh, that's awesome.
And yes. And then I always share with parents that coaching is something that can pair nicely with therapy. So if you do have a teenager that is in therapy and maybe they're dealing with more clinical anxiety or depression, coaching can also be a really nice complement to helping them do the looking forward as they're healing. And so I definitely share both the idea of coaching and therapy as resources for any parents that are feeling overwhelmed and just unsure of what to do next.
I love that. I have nothing against therapy. Therapy can be really great, but I feel like coaching is a little bit more laid back. So I feel like therapy has a stigma, especially with young kids, of like, oh my gosh, I have to go to therapy. Like something's wrong, or you know what I'm saying? It's not, I feel like there's a little bit that teens can hold back because it's just therapy. Maybe it's the name or whatever, or it's the professional office where you're sitting down, you know what I'm saying? Versus like coaching with you, I personally, if I was a teen, would feel more comfortable of like opening up and
it's very interesting.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's such a process, and I hope over time we just continue to destigmatize or anything surrounding mental health and personal development. And yes, I hope it all just becomes more just accessible. But yes, I do take that stance that coaching is not about getting fixed. It's about self-discovery and finding the gems or the beautiful parts about yourself and growing those. And I do think it has more of that sort of forward thinking, accountability and partnership feel. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Well, I will make sure to put all your links, especially on social media and your website in the show notes so they can reach out to you. I'm so thankful that we were able to sit down and do this. I know that I'm sure people are leaving a lot of good things to do and thoughts and books. I will definitely keep that little hand thing in mind. That's actually very helpful. I like
it's a really good one. It's a really good one. Yes. And another thing just came to mind too. As a positive discipline educator, I love the positive discipline system, and they have a book specifically for teenagers. And those are also like really easy, user-friendly books. And they have another one for parents of children of any age called Positive Discipline A to Z. And it literally has like nose picking. You look up like, if nose picking is happening, like here's what I could do. If you look up like challenging behaviors, like yelling at me, you look that up. It's like literally A to Z dictionary style. And it gives you a starting point. And so I share that with your audience and with you because it is definitely a massive tool. So
That's awesome. I need help with the booger picking. That would be helpful.
I had to share that for all of the younger ones. I was like, I know there's parents out here that are definitely thinking about that one right now.
Oh, for sure. But we're definitely always forward thinking too, because I
Yes.
think we don't dread, but we're just a little scared because it will be a new
Mhm.
territory in a couple years, and it comes up so quickly that the best thing we can do is be prepared versus just
Yeah.
like teenage years hitting you and you're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Mm-hmm.
taking this on
Yes.
now. But thank you so much for coming
Thank
on
you
today.
so
I
much.
appreciate
Yes, it
it.
was so lovely to talk with you and love what you're doing. So thanks for putting so many resources out there in the world for parents and families.
Yes, of course.